In business, speed and precision matter, but accountability is what separates the high flyers from the crash and burns. Now, in this episode, we'll explore how fighter pilot tested leadership principles can bring relentless clarity, ownership, and results to any organization.
Welcome to Fortify Live with your host, Ford Saeks.
So joining us today is Robert Cujo Teschner. He goes by Cujo. He's a retired U.S. Air Force F-15C and F-22 fighter pilot, former weapons school instructor, F-22 squadron commander, and the founder of VMax Group. Now, Cujo was the Air Force's go-to expert in debriefing methodology. That same system that helps pilots self-correct and perform under extreme pressure is what we're going to be exploring today. So, Cujo, welcome to Fortify Live.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Ford. This is a pleasure.
Well, tell me a little bit about, let's just open it up for our listeners. So we're live right now on Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube and a few other places. And the audio from this does become the Business Growth Show podcast. So if you're listening, we're talking to Cujo Teschner. You can find him at vmaxgroupllc.com. So Cujo, how did you transfer from a fighter pilot into leadership? And tell us a little bit about that transformation.
Yeah, good. So there's two major inflection points for me. One of the inflection points was back when I was teaching at our fighter weapons school, which I must add was the original fighter weapons school. The Air Force had it first. Navy copied us, didn't give us credit for it. But anyway, there you have it. So I was teaching there, and I had some experience, friends that were in the business space who were talking about and were really lamenting the state of leadership. They were talking about the absence of real leadership, folks that were being promoted into leadership positions because they were technical experts in what they did, but hadn't been equipped with what they needed in order to lead effectively. And it was disrupting to my friends. And I'm like, well, what we're doing here at the weapons school is we're teaching leadership. Yeah, we might be talking about how to fly better and to use our systems more effectively, but really what we're training people on how to do is to lead teams that win in the most disruptive environment ever. And back in 2004, it occurred to me that maybe those principles that we were teaching at the weapons school should be taught in business. So that was the first kind of big idea and something that I decided that someday I would work out on. And then the second major point, inflection for sure, was I had colorectal cancer while I was on my progression through my military career. And that caused me to leave my military career and have to figure out something else to do. And so after being in a couple of small businesses, I decided, you know what? I think the theory probably needs to be tested, and now's the time to do so. And so I took my idea out there into the world of business and found a client who was willing to take a risk on an unproven, untested guy named Cujo, of all things. And when that test worked beyond our wildest expectations, I decided to build a business around it. So that's the story.
And now you've built a very successful business. We're both keynote speakers. Full disclosure, everybody watching this, if you're looking for a leadership speaker, check out Cujo. I mean, he'll come in and kick off your conference with a bang. My listeners are franchise brands, franchisees, private equity groups, associations, entrepreneurs. So today's topic is about leadership, but it's also about how an entrepreneur takes value and repackages it. So you took your experience as, in flight training in the Air Force and then transferred it to business, because I think it's so important, because even me, the biggest leadership people that I've had, and I've had clients that are Green Berets and SEALs and Special Forces and Blue Angels. I've got clients that are Blue Angels, and of course, fighter pilots like you and Waldo and a few other people out there on the circuit. But every time I'm on with those guys in a mastermind, I really see the leadership qualities, and not just leadership, but the way they listen, the way they make decisions, the whole framework from, culture to leadership, team building, management, communication, and change, and really wrap that into a system that works. Because you do have a proven system, because in business, okay, you mess up, you might lose a customer, but in your line of work, you mess up and that can kill people.
That's right. Yeah, the stakes are pretty high. But, I'd say one of the biggest objections that I've come across as I brought the toolkit that we were equipped with, and we'll talk more about that in a second, toolkit that we were equipped with, learning to lead in the Air Force, by extension in the military, into business. One of the primary objections and it's so easy to give into the self-limiting belief of we can't change, we can't do this, is that, hey, it was life or death for you, Cujo, and that's not the way that it is here, so it wouldn't work. And I to some degree, I understand, but I also disagree with that approach. And I remember during the pandemic, our neighbors across the street, 25 years working in one company, very senior, very well thought of, also had a golden parachute, like if let go, huge severance package.
Right.
But they waited until a declaration of a national emergency to let him go, in which case the severance package wasn't actually applicable. And so 2 weeks of pay and benefits, and then it was all gone. And that was a form of death. And I mean, if you just think about it, to go from we're rock solid to you just lost it all. Mortgage, just put in a new pool, kids in school. I mean, that's okay. It's not death, but it's horrible. And it can be really hard to make it through that. So I do think that there is, and you look at the amount of businesses that don't make it, you go back and take a look at all the good to great companies that are no longer with us. That's a problem. And we need to be ready to have the same kind of mindset, hey, we're going to win this thing mindset in order to go into the world of business and to handle all of the disruptions that we're always facing. Marketplace always shifting. The people that we work with, what they like, what they dislike about work is also shifting. We got all kinds of generational concerns, and the list of things tied to AI that are disruptors to us goes on and on and on. So we have to, I do think, look to an organization that spends all of its time trying to figure out how to lead in a disruptive world to extract principles that we can use. And what I find is it's very, very effective.
Well, you talked about this toolkit and principles, and I know that for me, I've always been an entrepreneur. My listeners know my story. I started at 15 and had a bunch of businesses and patents and things. But the success of my company was always around the leadership and the leadership aspect. So in business, I believe people are strong in one of three areas: leadership and operations, marketing and sales, or they're a practitioner. They're really good at delivering whatever the product or service is. And most entrepreneurs are good in two. So I was always really strong in the marketing and sales aspect. I understood how to create value and add more value. And I understood how to deliver great customer experiences. And the leadership part was always a challenge for me because I grew up a kid from the projects in foster care. I didn't have a role model. Like I didn't have anybody. In fact, when I went to therapy, they said, "Do you know about Star Trek?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, in Star Trek, there were three main characters. There was the captain, who was made the decisions. There was Spock, who was logical, and then there was Bones, the doctor, who was emotional." He said, "Ford, you've run your entire life with Bones and Spock, either logic or emotion. You don't have a captain." And I was like, "Okay, that's little hard for me to take," but it really made sense. And what happened was when I started to make some decent money, that's when I started to really hire leadership people that said, "Oh, you can't do this. What are you doing? And this is not the right formula." But I had no idea because I wasn't in the military. I didn't have the structure, the discipline, and the consistency. So if you're listening to this episode, regardless of your feelings of military, and I appreciate your service and everybody in the military, I will say that loudly here. At the same time, you've got to look at your business, right? If you want to be successful in business, you have to make sure that you're strong and you hire your weakness. So if you're not a strong person in leadership, you need to make sure you get strong leaderships, or you follow this toolkit that we're about to explore today. Because whether you're a solopreneur, you still need to lead your company, or whether you're leading a company. I just got back from speaking at Rourke Capital Group. They are a private equity firm that owns or has interest in many top brands that you would know: Subway, Fast Signs, Orange Theory, Anytime Fitness, a bunch of brands. You guys can Google them. But it was interesting to listen to their leadership style because they really had strong leadership, strong methodologies that they're using. The same thing in franchising. So tell us a little bit about this toolkit that people can do. Well, first, before you tell me about the toolkit, let's talk more about the problem. So right now, you mentioned a few of the problems. There's generational differences. There's staffing differences. There's disruption in the marketplace. How does an organization know where to start to try to determine what the real problem is?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think anybody's really too concerned about like identifying the problem, because what most folks are saying is my teammates don't care as much as I do. They're not giving me what it is that I probably should be expecting from them. I'm willing to tolerate it because something's better than nothing, and it's just an unpleasant kind of minefield that I'm walking through on a regular basis, trying to do what it is that I know that needs to be done in order to continue with our chain of success. And there's variations of that.
Right.
But ultimately, at the end of the day, most entrepreneurs know that nobody cares as much as you do, and you're not getting as much as you could from the team that you've hired, even when you've got the right people in the right seats in the bus. And I think where it all starts with is understanding what our purpose is and what we're doing. And I think back in my previous life, and I mean, purpose was very, very clear. In fact, it was instilled in me the day that I raised my right hand as a 17-year-old kid and swore an oath to, protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I mean, I knew that might entail giving my life, and I was willing to do it because it was something worth doing. How do you get to that in business? And I remember post-colon cancer, one of the things that I ended up having to do in order to provide for the family, because my body was broken.
Right.
I was stuck in a bathroom all the time. Like I couldn't, it was horrible. My wife was a single parent of 4 kids because I couldn't be trusted with them, because as soon as my body let me down, I was gone, and it could be for hours. It was just miserable. And so I ended up as a mortgage loan officer for a while. And I'm selling mortgage loans over the phone. And once I figured out that there was a T in mortgage, I felt like I was making progress in my business. 100% commission sales guy, and I'd never been trained to sell anything. And all of our clients were primarily very, very cold to actually hostile leads. We were calling over the phone. It was a tough transition. My military transition out is an example of what not to do.
Right.
And one of the things about that business was that the kind of primary motivator that I noticed was, hey, we got to go sell mortgage loans to make money. And if you could sell more mortgage loans, you can make more money. And so it was money, money, money. And we talked a lot about money. And this was jarring for me because it never been about the money. I mean, you as an officer, you make a good salary, but you're not going to be rich doing that. So money was never the thing. Certainly it was not at all a factor when I raised my right hand, because I was making no money back then. And I needed something deeper. And so to those who object to the notion of we can find purpose in our business when it isn't about life and death and protecting the country, hear me on this. Some of the most compelling loans that I ever closed were the ones that earned me the least amount of money. I remember we had an elderly couple that had a $85,000 mortgage, which if I refinanced, that was going to net Team Teschner maybe $250. Okay, so this was not the thing that would inspire you to spend 4.5 months working really, really hard. But it took that long to get this thing to the finish line. And when we finished it, that elderly couple went from having zero disposable income to actually having some resources to go on a date night, to occasionally eat out where they previously couldn't, to kind of live life again. And to me, that was like a stunning achievement. Like I found it to be brilliant. And there's several more of those kinds of stories, people trying to help family members deal with cancer, no treatment in the United States, can go someplace else to prolong life. And all of a sudden, this mortgage loan thing becomes an instrument to fundamentally change somebody's life. And to me, I found that there was tremendous purpose there. And it was in the discovery of that purpose that I felt emotionally connected to what I was doing. I actually had an experience of, this is worth doing, just like my previous job was. I'm excited about coming to work. And that's something that, I mean, last time I looked at Gallup data, the number of employees across the planet who are actively disengaged, which Gallup defines as taking actions to harm the organization that employs, were like somewhere between 15 and 17%. Stunningly horrible, like totally unethical, but there it is. How do you affect that? A couple of things, one of which is the way that we practice accountability, which we'll talk about here in a bit. But then the other piece is giving us a sense of meaning tied to the work that we do and an understanding of the impact that we make in doing it. When you go back and with an entrepreneurial audience over here, Ford, I mean, go take a look at Google's Project Aristotle. Google does this multi-year deep dive into how come some of our teams are better than others. And what was consistent amongst all the best teams at Google, and they've been very public about this, you can go look and, there's brilliant articles written about this. Every one of those teams understood the meaning that they derived from the work that they did and the impact that they made in doing it. And that's really foundationally important to all of us. So I think that's a step, though different answer to your question. I think it's a great starting point to really try to figure out what is our purpose at the organizational level, at the team level, to feed the individual level, to give us some meaning in what we're doing.
I think that's a great foundation, because if they don't have that, nothing else matters, right? That's the foundation from which to build on. And so then you go to the next step. So what are some of the other steps that someone says, okay, I've defined my purpose, or they've hired you to help them, navigate those new directions. Once they have the purpose and they have everybody on the same page, and the old Dan Sullivan, or if it's him, I can't remember, all the butts in the seats, whatever. But it's really making sure that it's clear, because I know when I go into organizations from a marketing perspective, or if I do sales training, so I do marketing sales training, right? Not leadership so much, but the marketing sales side. I'll ask the sales team, okay, what's your outcome? What's your value proposition? And if they have 30 people on their team, I get 30 different answers, right? And then I ask the leadership what it is, and I get another answer. And so it's like, okay, well, we have obviously there's a problem in the marketplace because they're not in alignment. So once they have alignment in the purpose and things, what's the next step for them to take?
Yeah, so when people hear about me, it's often tied to the fact that I teach accountability. I teach force accountability. I actually teach a different version of accountability than what any of us was inculcated with growing up, and certainly a totally different form of accountability than exists in business. Usually, and this is now based off of, I've been doing the business side of this thing for about 7.5 years now. Usually the trigger into accountability is a failure or something bad having happened. And the outcome of accountability is we're looking backwards and blaming the person or the process. I think that the gentle approach is to say, it's not about the person, it's about the process. But Ford, you own the process, and so fix it, kind of a thing.
Right.
That's the way that accountability works. So therefore, it's become a bad word. Nobody wants it. Nobody gets excited about it. And yet the C-suite says we need more of it because in its absence, we're not as good as we could be, which I fundamentally agree with. I totally agree. If you don't practice accountability, you're not as good as you could be. But the version of accountability that I was taught when I was in the Air Force, and the one that I still teach to this day, says that accountability should not be a weapon. It's not about punishing people into success. It's not about harnessing fear to spark change. It's about figuring out how to learn, after we've done what we've done, everything that we can about how it was that we did this, so that we can be confident we're going to have a better experience the next time. Meaning, if we won this time, we're going to have the discipline to figure out why we won. Because we need to figure out, did we win due to luck, or did we win due to us? And if it was due to us, who needs to be recognized for that so that it can be reinforced so they know to do it again the right way next time? And if we lost, what can we learn about this losing experience to guarantee that we're never going to lose this way again? And that doesn't exist in a vacuum. So I was taught to debrief to win, but if we haven't planned correctly, we don't have the right to practice accountability. And so the real process starts in, hey, what are the expectations that we're supposed to be meeting? How do we plan to meet those expectations? How do we communicate the plan in a way that inspires? How do we, while we're executing, pre-debrief to help guarantee that we get the outcome that we want? And then how do we, at the end of this whole thing, learn to have a better iteration the next time? And I cannot think of a team that doesn't benefit from that approach. I mean, that's at home, at a church, that's on your volleyball or softball or whatever it is that you do and for sure, that's in your business enterprise.
So would that be what, in the military called what do they call it? After action report? What's it called?
The Army calls it an after action review, an AAR, and it's a different format and structure than what the Air Force calls a debrief. And what the Air Force calls a debrief was birthed in World War I. There's structure to it. And part of the structure is knowing that we're never going to move on to the next mission until we've debriefed this one. So there's a discipline to it, discipline structure that we always debrief, which lowers the temperature, by the way, in these things. In fact, I was just on a coaching call, and the person I was coaching at this company explained they just had one of the best debriefs ever. And they were so excited, but he was so excited about it. And the reason he was excited because they learned so much from a really bad disaster. And there was so much good. I mean, if you listen to the conversation, you'll be like, wow, this debrief thing really works. It's working well for this company. Outstanding. I asked him, I said, hey, what was the trigger event that caused you to debrief? He's like, well, it was the disaster. I'm like, everything that you said up until this point was perfect. But the issue that I have with this is that it was a failure that triggered the debrief. What should have happened is the debrief was going to happen regardless of outcome. It should have been on the schedule.
Right.
And by doing so, if we know that this thing is always going to exist, then we're not worried about it. It's just an is thing. And if we have now a structure for how we conduct it, and by the way, in business, the worst questions we can ask, in my humble opinion, after something has happened is what went well and what didn't. And the reason that I say that is, though the intent behind those questions is pure, there's no structure, there's no setup for analysis. It allows us to be highly subjective in what it is that we're talking about. It allows us to waste a ton of time. It allows nefarious actors to potentially cover up things by not talking about the stuff that we should be discussing. And it sets us up to carry risk forward. Though the intent behind those questions is pure, in practice, it's probably the worst approach to take when it comes to accountability. What I was taught was a structure for how we practice accountability, the thing that's going to happen after every mission is done. And that structure guides us into having a correct outcome that we can be confident leads us into a better tomorrow. And so if the internet were to explode right now, we never finished our conversation. And the last thing that anybody heard as we're talking about this right now is the debrief is designed to help us to have a better tomorrow. That is a fundamentally different approach to the way that most forms of accountability are looking, which is backwards and blame oriented. The debrief is positive and forward focused, and that's so needed.
So I know my producer listens to these episodes. Her name's Crystal, and my CMO is Devin. And you must be a fly on the wall, because the only time we've done a debrief is when something gets messed up, and I'm on the call, typical undisciplined leader. What the hell happened here? Why did this do? Who did it wrong? And I have a saying in a keynote that says, if you're asking the wrong question, the answer doesn't matter. So I've been asking all the wrong questions, which means the results don't matter. I haven't made the debrief a natural part of it. Now, for those of you listening to this episode, look, those that think they know everything and don't know what they don't know are scary people. I ask for help not because I'm weak, but because I want to remain strong. So I love having these episodes with experts like you where I can take things away too. So even though I'm an expert and I go in and help organizations grow, the people you got to be scared of are the ones who aren't even open to learn. And what you're talking about, I do debriefs it from marketing standpoint all the time. We have a campaign, we test, track, modify, and repeat. That's my formula. We did a test. What was the conversions? What was the numbers? What do we want to, what worked, what didn't in that test? And then what are we going to test again? So I've always done it from a marketing standpoint, but actually until this, even though I've had dozen leadership experts, this has been the best transition. And maybe they say, the teacher will appear when the student's ready type thing. But it just happened this morning on a challenge that we had with an interface between WooCommerce and Stripe and QuickBooks, and the interface was wrong and the orders got put into the wrong GL account. And I'm like, I'd rather put a fork in my eye than have this conversation right now. And of course, I'm getting frustrated. Now my team's frustrated, and we're on Zoom, and everybody's, hypothetically, this is for educational, informational purposes only. But the point is that it's so true that what I'm going to start doing, certainly after this call, is making the debrief part of the pre-planning process. So it's like you said about that customer, that client you were working with, they only triggered it because they had something go wrong. Where if they do it naturally, then it becomes part of the system.
That's right. And I'll tell you, there's an attitude, there's really a sort of predisposition that we need to train ourselves to have coming into this, especially when there's been a failure, because how we present ourselves, tone, attitude, demeanor, questions we ask, and the way that those questions are asked really determines the effectiveness of the debrief. And if we as leaders, positional authority leaders, come in and we're upset, it triggers defensiveness. If we're frustrated, it causes people to withhold. We don't get the full truth of what it was that took place. And if we don't have the full truth, then what we're learning could be wrong. So that's a big danger with trying to do this with the wrong mental state, wrong attitude, wrong tone, disposition, and whatnot. What I was taught as a young pup in the F-15 world is you come into a debrief with childlike curiosity. You never assume that you know what happened. You never rush to judge about anything that took place. You come in with childlike curiosity, and the quality of your questions is going to determine the effectiveness of this deal. And so we're very disciplined about trying to maintain a positive atmosphere by virtue of tone, attitude, and the way that I didn't get the call sign Cujo because I was necessarily overly nice. I had to work really, really hard. Okay. Really hard. Yeah.
Looking for my sound effect. Go ahead.
That's nicely done. I had to work really hard to condition myself to, on the heels of a really big disaster, be positive about it. And the only way that I could figure to do that is to think to myself as I'm coming into the debrief of a disaster, man, if we do this the right way, it's going to guarantee that we never have this disaster again, which means this is the best learning tool that we could have. It's better than a simulation. It's better than walking through scenarios. It's better than an academic treatise. It's better than sitting in another lecture. It's the best tool that we have. And if we harness this the right way, it's going to be the most effective one that we've ever experienced. And so I've had some pretty dangerous situations and near-death experiences. One of my near-death experiences I remember, as it's happening, like we're in the midst of living our way through this, I have this momentary reflection. What a gift. And I guess it's a twofold gift. A, we're still alive, and I think we're going to make it. B, we're never going to stop telling this story. And in so doing, because it's not about serving us, in so doing, we're going to hopefully guarantee that nobody actually dies in a situation just like this, which is the best gift that we could ever be given. Now, what a great disposition to have. And yes. By the way, when we can rise to the level of leadership required from us on the heels of a failure to lead through it well, which really comes down to changing from a leader mentality to a mentor, coach, and teacher, then we're creating teams that are so different from anybody else's that nobody would ever want to leave here. One of the things that I have noted about the application of, and again, everything that I teach is what I was gifted as an officer in the Air Force, specifically a fighter pilot. When we introduce it to places that have never had it, the team dynamics are so stunningly different that why would you want to leave this thing? Because you know that wherever you go next won't have it. And that's an incredibly good selling point.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, whenever I do a pre-event call with a client to go and do the opening keynote, I always ask them, well, can you share your top 3 challenges? And inevitably, it's always around staffing in some respect. How do they find, attract, engage, and retain top talent? How do they do that? And then it's about how do they improve the customer experience? And then it might be how do they grow? How do they, bridge the gap between where they are and where they want to go? So I've always had to apply these things. So it's interesting that I'm doing some of the things right. So I'm going to give myself a little bit of credit, but I can see so many opportunities. And I hope our listeners can really, go back and share this episode with the other people on your team that need to hear it, because it's a cultural change to get everybody on the same page. So if you're in leadership, obviously look into this. And again, we're talking to Cujo Teschner. His last name for the audio is Teschner, and you can find him on LinkedIn. And of course, you can find him at VMaxGroupLLC.com. But I want to transition and ask you a question. So your company name VMax, from what I understand, it comes from the fighter pilot's emergency thrust switch. But how does that metaphor translate into urgency and decision-making in business?
Yeah, great question. And as a side note, about a year after I named the company, a buddy of mine that I hadn't heard from a while calls me up and he's like, dude, you beat me to it. I'm like, okay, what have I beaten you to? And he's like, I was going to name my company VMax. And I was doing a scan to see if it existed, and you took it already, which I thought was kind of funny.
Fantastic.
So, yeah, I thought that was pretty good. Timing's everything. Look, so if we need it, in the F-15, we've got this additional capability, which is really, really effective, and it's really, really powerful. What I find as I think about the translation into business is that even companies where they're doing pretty well, they need that occasional boost. And usually the boost isn't in terms of the product. It isn't in terms of the sales strategy necessarily. It's about how do I get this team to handle this disruption that we're facing with better, because I need that in order for us to continue with our steady state growth over here. And so incorporating tools is our equivalent of hitting the VMax switch to give us that boost into better performance to help us to navigate what the disruption is. The difference between this VMax boost and the one that we had in the airplane is this one lasts. Right. And it's a really, really good thing that it does so. So that I hope that answers your question.
It certainly does. And I got one more question, then we'll do the wrap up with your thoughts. But so AI is disrupting all the buying experiences right now, right? It's, people are losing their jobs. They're either coming from two groups. They're either extremely overwhelmed by all the speed and change that's happening, the disruption in the company, or they're grossly overconfident or dangerously overconfident. They think they've got it all figured out, right? So those are the scary ones to me. And so when you look at leadership and just the customer experience and leading teams, how do you feel AI is disrupting, or what do you see? I'm just looking into, if you have a crystal ball, and I actually have one that's behind me over here. What do you see in your crystal ball for the future of business and leadership with this disruption of chatbots and co-CEOs that are GPT, custom GPTs, and that kind of thing?
Yeah. At the macro level, I think we're going to hit a wall. And I think that if we're putting all the eggs in the AI is going to solve everything basket, we're going to be disappointed. That's my fundamental belief. But practically speaking, I think what we're seeing is the need for much better leadership as we're navigating all of this. It's very easy to dehumanize the human team when we over rely on technology, and that's going to cause a problem. And so people that were still hiring into certain human positions, if they have no ability to be human with other people, they're going to be horrific leaders. And so it's actually important that we keep this in the forefront of our mind and figure out how it is that we're going to build a generation of leaders amongst a group of people that is increasingly reliant on technology to do literally everything. And then the other piece of this is we have to be ready to learn our way through all of this disruption, because again, I think we're about to be very disappointed through an over-reliance of and a unmet expectations with capability sets. So the question is, are we a strong learning organization, or are we just kind of hitching our trailer to this thing and hoping that it takes us where it needs to be? And if there's one thing that I would say typifies a fighter squadron, it's this. It's an outstanding human learning organization, because that's the only thing that we can depend on, our ability to learn. Bad guys may have better tech than we do. Bad guys may have better numbers than we do. Bad guys might have even been more trained in this one thing than we are. There's any number of things that we don't know about them. The only thing that we can rely on is one another and our ability to learn. And again, I cannot think of a domain that wouldn't benefit from taking that approach. And right now with everything, because we're living through it as well, with everything that's going on, we really need to learn how to continue to build leaders of human teams and learn as fast as we can. That was the best thing that happened during the pandemic. It forced us all to learn quickly. And in such a horrific experience, many of us learned very well how to learn. Question is, are we still great learning organizations? And if not, what are we going to do about that?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I agree with those perspectives, because like even my book, it's called AI Mind Shift Over My Corner. It's about the mind shift. Is that I even though I speak on a lot of AI, and I'm not an advocate for taking the human out of the loop. In fact, I think that the real asset going forward is those people that do have the leadership skills, the human skills, because we're going to go through a pendulum swinging one way to where everybody thinks AI is a solution. And like you said, we're going to reach that stopping point where everybody's going to realize that it's the human factor that's going to make all the growth going forward, and the ability to communicate. And we have a whole generation, not just with COVID, but everything else, that has corrupted the communication style, because you're all on your phones, you're in the screen, and now you got AI. And I think what's going to happen is it's going to shift the other direction. And those organizations that are anticipatory and think forward of what's going to come next and realize that keeping the human in the loop and is just so essential. Any closing thoughts as we wrap this up today?
Yeah, one thing that I've actually to say everywhere I go now, because I know that I need to, is when it comes to learning a new skill set, when it comes to deploying a new capability, whatever the case might be, if we say that it's going to be too hard and it's not going to work, I guarantee you it won't. Like, that's 100% guarantee it will not. If, on the other hand, we come into this thing saying, you know what, it may be hard, there may be some disruption, it requires a little bit more effort, et cetera, but there's a chance that it might work, well, then we're giving it that chance. And that's a really important thing to think about. And in a world where it's so easy to capsize and to explain away why it is we didn't do it, and to sort of adopt this mentality of, we're victims, I think we could look to high-performance military teams for some guidance. Over there, when disruption hits, and it always does, the attitude isn't woe is us. The attitude is cool. Because when we win, which we always will, the story that we get to tell is so much better than if everything had gone according to plan. And living in that kind of a world jazzes you up. So combined with a compelling purpose, living with a bunch of people who every day know that nothing's going to go according to plan, but they're still going to find a way to win so that they can talk about and celebrate the fact that they have, that can't help but inspire. And I think all of us need a little bit of dose of that.
Absolutely. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in to Fortify Live, where we're all about accelerating your business growth. Until next time, keep innovating, keep growing, and keep fortifying your success. Thanks so much, Cujo.
Thank you for tuning in to Fortify Live. Make sure to like, comment, and share this episode on your favorite social media platform. And don't forget to subscribe to the Business Growth Show podcast, available wherever you get your podcast streaming fix. We air weekly at 11 a.m. Central Time. So until next week, keep pushing the boundaries and never stop growing.